Today we had the honor of speaking with Al Nofi, one of the original founding members of SPI, a wargame company that led the industry in the 1970s. Here we discuss the history of the company and the hobby and where it might be headed. This is Legendary Tactics.
Well, of course, in the beginning, there was no hobby. I mean, there was Avalon Hill and Tactics 1 and then Tactics 2. So I encountered Tactics 2 in high school. I graduated high school in 1961. There was a fellow in he had dropped out of high school when he was 17. And he pushed up his draft number, but he only served 18 months because he was injured. So he went back to school. So he was not a classmate, but he was in the same, and he had learned how to play Tactics 2 in the Army. And so that's how I encountered wargaming. I looked up wargaming. Went to the New York Public Library and looked up wargaming. It turned out that they had several, in between the Brooklyn Library and the New York Library, there were several classic 19th century, like Totten's American War Games, and was Coast Artillery War Game from 1910 or so, which is now available reissued. And I of course started designing war games. And then whenever I got a chance, I would buy a war game. And of course, Avalon Hill was coming out one every year or so. So that, and of course, finding a person to play with was kind of difficult. The thing that kicked off the hobby really was Avalon Hill coming out with their little magazine, The General, because that began to put people in touch all across the country. You know, we live in this day of instantaneous, communication, and we don't realize there was no way to reach people in those days, mass, in a hurry. So I wrote a little article about something. I don't remember what even. I think it was Jim Dingman who called me and mentioned that this fellow Jim Dunnigan had a contract with Avalon Hill to produce Jutland.
Yeah, that was back in 1969, I think.
No, that's even much earlier than that, Jutland.
Earlier.
Yeah. 1914 in Jutland. And but I like to come and play test it. So we were play testing Jutland on the roof of his apartment building.
Well, you need a lot of space for Jutland.
Yeah. Then he decided, he had all this data. He thought about publishing a series of small pamphlets with all the data from the game. I can't remember the name of them now. Strategy and Tactics came out with by
Wagner, wasn't it?
Yeah, Wagner, which Wagner was stationed in Japan in the Air Force there, flying spy missions over China. And the original magazine was published from Japan, yeah.
Yeah, mailed it over.
Yeah. So I did 1 or 2 articles for him. And meanwhile, I'm play testing games, and Jim is, got this little churning out a little game every once in a while. I did the Waterloo pamphlet for his little series, which was associated with the game. We were still his little apartment in Brooklyn there. I'm trying to think now. Then he moved up to what is now the fashionable East Village, which was not very fashionable in those days. Wagner couldn't continue with the magazine. So
he only did the first year, I think, and then is this 17 issues, I guess, and then he couldn't make it work financially.
No, in 69.
Mm-hmm.
Spring of 69, I went to Europe. My uncle had a yacht. He had a trimaran ketch. It was the largest sailing trimaran in the world at the time. And he had it built in Greece, and then it was in Spain for a while. Summers we used to go and take tourists on little rides, And we were going to bring her to the West Indies. So just before I leave, Dunnigan asked, could he borrow $100? I was the only one that had a steady job. I was teaching. So I said, sure, I lent him the $100. We had all sorts of adventures. I eventually got back. Ship sank, actually. I eventually got back in September. And I discovered that I'm now the the something a research editor or something for Strategy and Tactics magazine. But we were talking about games, what kind of games to design. And I said, the Renaissance would be really good. You ought to think about designing a game like that. He said, no, you ought to think about design. So that was my first game, Renaissance of Infantry, which actually touched off a whole series of other games. The Centurion came out of that, and then the revisions of all those the sort of small level, what is it, 100 meters, I think.
Yep.
The 100-meter hexes. And from that, I ended up doing other games. And of course, we were in a cellar on 13th, no, on 2nd Avenue, I think it was. Well, anyway, in somewhere in the fashionable East Village. So it's, that little operation, we got all these teenage kids doing games and, packing games and cutting counters and stuff. And the guy who had the other half of the basement was a pornographer. And so funny stuff happened. One day, he brought over some samples. So Dave Isby was there, and when he came into work, and he found that the kids that were there that were supposed to be packing games were reading the porno. So he took some of the porno and he took the magazines and threw them in an envelope and put it aside. And one of the kids accidentally mailed it out to some guy who ordered a game. We never heard back, but a couple of weeks later we got like this humongous order, and we were wondering if it was, somebody hoping to reorder porn,
Yeah.
And then of course moved up to a building on 23rd Street, which I think is still there. It was one of the last parts of Manhattan that still had DC current. We had to get special typewriters, and then we moved over to the building on the corner of 23rd and Park South, which is now luxury apartments. Yeah, and meanwhile we're doing games and whatnot, and we got into a rhythm. I guess I designed about 8 or 10 games. I was teaching at the time. I took a 2-year leave, and then went back to teaching. I might not have gone back, except that the rumors on the horizon about the financial crisis. So I said, let me go back to teaching. So I will be, if I get, this way I'll be an employed teacher. If the crisis comes, I'll have I'll be in my fallback. Because if the crisis comes when I'm not teaching, they may not bother hiring me again. But I was still coming down regularly and doing stuff. And we got into like a lot of routines. Of course, the people designing a game would do a lot of the preliminary work, and then we'd have to test it. And I had files on these. We'd have open house testing. Kids would come in. They want to play test games. Okay, so we take their names down, and then we give them to people. Like if we don't know who the kid is, we give them to somebody whose game is pretty much finished. They're just trying to polish it up a little bit.
Yep.
And then we get feedback from them, and see little comments. This kid is a nitpicker, so in a way he's good for the final product. Because he's liable to bring up something. Like there was a crazy one. Somebody said, the rules don't say I have to move from one hex to an adjacent hex. They just say I have to move one hex. Well, somebody could,
Yeah.
when people were looking for play testers, we'd have this file. Well, what kind of tester do you need? I need a nitpicker. I need someone who's really a good thinker and a good player. This game is really done, and we want to make sure everything's working correctly and so on. And there were crazy things that happened, like the Marne game. I can't remember whose game it was. It might have been the Marne game, the one that begins with nothing on the board.
Oh, yes, yes.
I don't remember who was the designer. But in the course of the game, of course, on the first turn, the French arrive. It's actually the Germans move first, but on the first turn, the French arrive at the edge. The French and the British arrive at the edge of the map. They're retreating. And the next turn begins. The German moves on the map, and they start fighting their way down, to I mean, one of the problems with a 1914 game is we know what happened.
Yeah.
You know, so when it said, "I'm going to attack Paris. I'm going to capture Paris," you can't do that, because it's really heavily fortified. It's basically a fortress that's about the size of New York City, with hundreds of guns. But what about the super cannons that they used to blow away Liège? Oh, where were they? It took 3 weeks of I think it was me and Isby. It was me and somebody else,
Yeah.
probably, looking through histories of the war, military journals and stuff. Where the hell were those super heavy, the 12-inch and 16-inch mortars? We found it after 3 weeks. In an obscure journal, there was an article about the siege of Namur, and it turned out that after they had shot up Liège, they had, shot up Liège, they'd moved them down to capture Namur. And of course, those things moved incredibly slowly, so they couldn't possibly be at Paris at the time that this guy was going to attack.
Oh.
But that was actually useful. It actually is one of the things that wargaming is particularly valuable for. It's not playing the game and learning lessons from the game, designing the game, because all of the what ifs have to be tracked down. They don't know that a lot of these things are not going to end up if you're writing a book, but they're there. I designed maybe 8 or 10 games, and I had a hand in some other games, but I was doing the articles mostly.
Yeah, because you were essentially one of the editorial staff of S&T.
Yeah, I was. I think for the first 100 or so issues, my name appears in it about as often as Dunnigan's or Redmond's. So we had this style. Even after I left, I'm still working for. I was still a stockholder. So I
Yes.
So like I'd pop in. We'd have regular routine. Oh, one of the things, by the way, working for SPI was really wonderful. There was no bureaucracy. You didn't have to be in the office, except where meetings were scheduled. So you could wander in at any time. In the first office we had on 23rd, on the corner building, because we had 2 floors. The first building space we were in, we gave it up for the larger space. But that first space had a shower in the men's room. So you could literally just camp out there for the weekend working on a project, But we get together. I think it would say something like, "I want to do a game on, such and such. I was thinking about using this, game system sort of be on that scale. What do you actually say? I mean, you get back from, and I'm taking notes. What do we need? And I head for the library, the card catalog. Unlike internet, card catalog allows a lot of serendipity. It's like going to a real used bookshop.
Yes.
Where you find the book you desperately want, and when you find it, but you would never have thought to look for it.
Yeah.
It was also was good. The card catalog was good because you could pick up babes. I mean, I was doing something. It was for one of the naval games, and I was at the library, and I needed to find some Janes and whatnot, pre-World War II, although not pre-World War II Janes are not really reliable, But I can't find them, they're out. Okay, I'm walking back, and I spot this young woman there. She's got a pile of Janes there, And it turned out she was doing a university thesis on something or other. We got together. We had a few dates. Can't do that on the internet, let me tell you. Anyway, so I'd go and I'd rummage through materials. And of course, after a while, you get used to what's there and what's not. I'd usually go for 3 or 4 different projects. And of course, the serendipity would turn up stuff that nobody wanted. But I'd make notes on something because, hey, just in case you want to do a game on, we've already got a head start here. We got some notes. And then we go back and forth designing the game and try and figure out how to play it. Well, we were the industry, because, I mean, Avalon Hill was still issuing games and 1 or 2 other startups, but we were producing more games than anybody.
Yeah.
And I think the bestseller was Panzerblitz, which had about 100,000, 120,000, something like that. And the magazine, I think the peak circulation of the magazine was about 35,000. But then you also had Game Design, no, the Alan Hill Supplement, and then Aries, the science fiction magazine. By the way, if you know anybody who wants them, I've got files that I have
Okay.
to get rid of.
Okay.
I'm clearing, I've given away thousands of books and games and everything over the last few years. So, we had 35,000 S&T readers, which probably meant maybe 100,000 readers altogether. There's a rule that a magazine, is read by 3 people or something. I don't know where that comes from. And you also have to think about our good fortune being in Manhattan. We had a concentration of nerdy kids. I mean, because even in New York, it was hard to find, people to play. But we had, some high school kids would come in, and some of them are now, like one of them was the ambassador of Kosovo. Another one, Bruce Schneier is a major influence in online security and civil liberties. I met him on the subway. I was teaching in East Harlem, and so of course come down on the East Side subway, and that particular day I wasn't going to S&T. I was just riding the train, and this kid gets on at 23rd Street and whips out S&T. Right, he was 13. So I'm looking over his shoulder. So I wrote that. So I got introduced him to a bunch of people there. But that's the kids we had.
Yeah.
I mean, I was working at the Naval War. I was not in the Naval War College, but I was working at the Naval War College. And I'm walking down towards the cafeteria one day, and this colonel is one of our 17-year-old kids. He retired as a brigadier general.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, these are the people we got. And of course, we'd have these gaming sessions, and we'd keep careful records about the players. We were careful about the feedback too. I was processing the feedback for a while, and I noticed, like the magazine, we'd mail out the magazine on Monday, say, right?
Mhm.
And on Friday, I'd start getting feedback, responses.
Yeah.
Good, bad, no good. Wait a minute. No. There's no way you could have played this game. You got it yesterday. I mean, so we developed. I don't remember how, but the first X number of responses we got, or the responses we got within a certain period, we just ignored.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep very close tabs on what the people wanted to hear. Which I think Decision Games is still doing in the magazine. I mean, I still get the magazine, but I sometimes even manage to read. The other thing was, of course, that Jim made a point of doing games that people didn't want. 1 or 2 games a year, he just let's try this,
Yeah.
and sometimes it worked out really well. I mean, the football game didn't work out very well, but several times, the designer's choice, I think he called it, an off the wall topic
Hmm.
caught people's attention. John Prados, internationally, scholar. I mean,
Yeah.
his first game was published by SPI, and that was the year of the rat. And we had a huge library, 4,000 or 5,000 books, I think,
Wow.
which all disappeared
Yeah.
when the folks in wherever it was that took it over for the first batch of people that took it over.
Like TSR, you mean?
No, before TSR.
Oh, okay.
I can't. The Bloom brothers from somewhere. Yeah. And the funny thing was, of course, some of those books actually didn't belong to SPI; they belonged to us, and we just left them there, because we were working on it.
Yeah.
Well, none of us were married. I mean, some of us still aren't married. um, I got married in '74, so I was 30 already. I'd been in the game business for 10 years already. We could multitask a lot. Like going to the library and doing research on 3 or 4 projects. I'd spend 4 or 5 hours, And whatever books came, I'd have, separate notes for each one and ship them out again. And we grew. I think the staff ended up at its peak of about 40 people. Now um, that included, I mean, the bureaucrat type, the bookkeeping and subscription maintenance and stuff, And went to computers very early. The TRS-80 Model 1, the hard disks that were the size of two telephone books, and it was a 1,000 megabytes or something. My God, that much. Let's just say that a couple of the early things that were published were freebies.
Mm-hmm.
Published on a certain company's private printing press because somebody was the night watchman. So that helped keep costs down.
That helps to cut costs.
Yeah. A lot of projects, sort of fed into each other. And research got easier relatively as the more we went on because we'd have a lot of material accumulated. I don't know how many versions of Waterloo we did, including the one that was free.
Yeah.
Yeah, the basic research was the same, for all of them. And then we just had people out there who came in with games. What the heck was his name? The cursed game. Sterling Hart, yes. Yeah, he came in with the game. And it just needed some hammering and tinkering, And of course, that was also helped by the fact that you could use a game system for different games. The 1914 system was essentially the same system that was used for Franco-Prussian War. The armies are still just working, and the terrain is almost the same. In fact, it's exactly the same. And you just had to factor out some other stuff. In fact, I always liked Franco-Prussian War because it actually was much more fluid to play than 1914. 1914 had this huge number of counters, all over the place, and in Franco-Prussian War you have far fewer counters, and you can make more use of the dummies and whatnot, so all of those things, rolled into helping us. And mostly it was fun.
Yeah.
Mostly it was fun. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was the occasional water gun fight. And then for a while, Jim had gerbils, I think. So he had gerbil tubes all over the office, and a gerbil would get loose occasionally. Whenever we hit a new milestone of income in a month, we'd go out and have a dinner somewhere. Oh, well, before we got the office, well, even after we got office space, we'd meet at Dunnigan's apartment several Fridays. I'd make a big pot of pasta, and we'd talk about business, what was, what we need to do, and so that helped. That was an informal kind of thing, and drink cheap beer. And Orbanes was only there briefly. Yeah, he was only there briefly. Towards the end, of course, he came. That probably was not the best. By the time we got to the 35-member staff, we were, the hobby was dying. When two things happened. Dungeons and Dragons came along, and computers came along. The nerdy kids playing Dungeons and Dragons were the nerdy kids that used to be playing the war games. I mean, there's still a board war game industry, but nobody's a real heavy hitter. I mean, Decision seems to manage, but
GMT as well.
Yeah, GMT, and of course with self-publishing, you can, what's his name? Rich Berg. He stopped being an attorney, retired to Charleston. And he would churn out a few games a year. I doubt that he made a huge amount of money, but it kept him busy, and he probably broke even, because you can do limited runs. You could see Dungeons and Dragons, very quickly begin to run out of kids that want to play war games, that want to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And I guess Star Wars may have had something to do with it too. Science fiction fandom, boomed. I can't remember the year. Sometime in the 60s. The last Worldcon in New York City. which was the home of the first Worldcon, right? And there were only maybe 3 or 4 thousand people, maybe, Now, but within a few years, you were getting like 3 or 4 thousand people in a local con.
Now,
Almost
SPI
Dungeons and
did some
Dragons.
science fiction games though, like Dawn of the
Yeah,
Dead and
yeah.
um,
But there were quite a number of games that didn't make Wreck of the Pandora. It actually got to the point where it went into I don't know what, it's not even a beta test version, but I had it for a while. I don't know what happened to it.
mhm.
Where you could actually move. The other was this spaceship crashes, and it's carrying animals, you know, and you got to find out which one. It randomizes which one. Each time you play, the cute one might be cute and cuddly in one, but cute, cuddly, and dangerous in another. Um, but that came right towards the end, and I think there were some personality issues involved. Redmond was not always the easiest person to get along with, and some people just wanted to move on. I mean,
Mhm.
like I say, 74, I got married, so although
Yeah.
I was still showing up, you know, once a week or so. I also wasn't spending my whole weekend working on a game project. The Bloom brothers, it was a hostile takeover,
Mm.
and eventually it got to TSR, and then it got to Decision. I can't remember exactly how that worked. Yeah, there was a loan made, I think, and then for some reason they panicked, because I remember talking to them and mentioned, that this just needs to be reorganized a little bit. It's in good shape.
Mhm.
And several other people said the same thing, but they just folded. They folded it, and then sold it to. Well, first they sold it to who was it? Because remember, Dunnigan came back to edit, and I was back
Yeah.
helping for about 18 months or 2 years, I think.
And this was after the Bloom brothers.
Yeah,
Okay. When did the Bloom brothers take over and
I,
what
I don't
happened there?
recall. I don't recall the
Yeah.
dates. Yeah, I think they may have thought they were being had, and towards the end there was a lot of issues that I was not because I wasn't there every day, so to speak,
Mm.
that I didn't know about. I know Jim and Redmond had a falling out over some. Um, and Jim, was had other interests too,
Mhm.
besides the magazine, and so it made sense not to keep it up. It's a good question. Never thought about it. A lot of the quad games, I think, the idea of the quad games, where you had a game in the magazine with an article about the period, and then you had 4 games out there
Mhm.
because you're using the exact same system, and you don't have to develop separate. I did Caporetto, and I forget what the name of the quad was. But you didn't need different charts and tables and whatnot, because I mean, you could have taken the counters from one and put them on the other board. It would have still worked. Um, One of the key things of the success of the magazine, if you tried to sell a war game magazine just for war games, you cut off part of your market. Everyone who's interested in war games is interested in military history. So what you need is a military history magazine that has war games, so that you get the people who aren't really interested in the war game, but the game is kind of a nice thing to have, but I want to read about this and this and this, because we did do a lot of articles on stuff that nobody ever heard of. In that Decision. What's his name? Joe Miranda is still keeping that up. There's like
Yes. Yeah.
every few issues, there's a totally off the wall, obscure topic that turns out to be an interesting read, but also an interesting, a challenging game. I think that was a critical element, and we get letters like mad, about the articles. That's not true. Well, why? Well, my uncle was Patton's personal tank driver, and he said that's not true. I mean, that's what we'd get that. Green, a white tank too. It was. I grew up with a kid who said that. My uncle, that his uncle was Patton's personal white tank driver.
Okay.
And went into battle. He went into battle with a white tank. Right. Yeah, sure. Right. Even at 12, I thought there was something wrong with that, But his uncle told him this story, and how much of military history about World War II is your uncle telling you a story and you believing it.
Yep.
Um, so we did get criticism from people like that, and because some of the games, there's a lot of original research. I mean, we weren't just going to three books on a shelf. We were going to official accounts and official documents, and that we could get the best we could.
So do you think the Quadra games would be the best?
Yeah,
Like,
I think that's a really good example of what could be done because they cover almost every period. And the series games, the ones like that ended up being revised into a second, verse. Centurion became, I forget, Chariot.
yeah,
No, Centurion became something else. Renaissance of Infantry became something else. Refining the rules and adding scenarios. Some of them didn't work. Rifle and Saber, I think,
hmm
because it was very difficult on the scale to find a battle, for that 100 meter scale. You've only got a really small map.
hmm
Um, so it's a map that you could do a very small battle, like some of the Revolutionary War battles. But come Civil War battles, you're not going to be able to fit them on the map. They're
yeah.
just they're just too big unless it's like something like Kernstown or something. Well, and the giant games, of course, the totally unplayable giant games. I mean, Frank Davis would lock himself in his office and came out with was it Wellington and the Peninsula, I think.
Yeah,
Was it Frank's? Anyway, he would
yeah.
lock himself in his office and you'd have this humongous game emerge.
But I think the
Oh.
famous one is Campaign for North Africa. Do you know anyone who ever played that all the way through?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody ever played that all the way through. I mean, you literally you need a staff to play the game.
Well,
And
they say it's best at 10 players.
yeah, yeah. The last version of my Imperium Romanum, the third edition, I did when I was in Texas. Man, it was hard to find players.
Yes.
Jesus. I mean, and this was in Austin. I was in Austin. We moved to Austin in '97, and there was a small wargaming club.
hmm
Um, then I ended up working for a think tank, and I was in Virginia for a while, then at Newport, then back at Virginia, and then so I was there for like 6 or 8 years, something like that. By the time I got back, I could not find any war gamers at all. There must be some there,
Yeah.
but the only game stores in Austin that I could find were the the computer game or
Yep.
the card collector type games.
Yeah.
So when I redid Imperium Runner for the third time, I was lucky enough to have maybe three people that I could rely on to do some testing. And that was
Right.
actually the last game I worked on.
Yes.
I,
Imperium
I have I have
Romanum.
several games in my files actually that I never finished.
hmm
Life interferes with
Yes.
getting stuff done. That's a good question. We inspired a lot of people to design games, and a lot of the people that played the games clearly learned. I mean, the fact that we got at least one brigadier general out of it, and an ambassador, and God knows how many other people. Um, when I was at the War College,
It
yeah.
was.
So this was a little. This was the Chief of Naval Operations private think tank, which had been established in the '80s. So we would get these naval captains, with 25 years experience, and they find out, oh, I used to play your games. I got several people saying that, and encountered it. And that apparently went like a bubble through, when you figure these guys were, this was in the early 2000s. So these guys have been in in for about 20, 25 years. In fact, one or two of them had been draftees. So they'd been so they were high school students when we were doing these games, and they had known these games. So they went like a bubble through the armed forces. I don't know if there's anybody in the armed forces. Well, there still is some game playing in the armed forces. They're more serious about it. But yeah, we created a body of work that still, there's a lot of classics. Almost everybody at SPI got a Charlie Roberts, except me. I never got a Charlie Roberts.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah,
Scandal.
I got robbed. I got
You
robbed.
got robbed.
No, seriously, when the first edition of Imperium Romanum uh, didn't sell well. They just, they the limited run and some. The second edition, they nominated it for the Charlie Roberts. And of course, the Charlie Roberts, I don't know if it's still the case, but in those days, it was controlled by the manufacturers. And so it was ruled that since it was a second edition, it didn't qualify as a new game. Right. Well,
Oh,
yeah.
that's too
So I'm
bad.
still waiting for my Charlie Roberts.
Yeah.
Not that I need another, plaque.
Yeah.
What you do in your life is avoid people giving you plaques because you're just going to leave them to your heirs and they're going to like throw them away.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Um, we had an auction on the occasion of the 40th anniversary. So that was 2009. Yeah. We had a reunion down in at the Center for Naval Analyses, which I had formerly worked for. Peter Perla set it up. And so I took all my memorabilia and we auctioned it off. And I think I raised $4,000 for charity. I even sold my stock certificates, which probably was illegal.
Yeah.
But they're apparently the only ones that survived. So,
Wow.
some of the gaming, you know, pages on Facebook, people will say, I found a copy of, although they tend to be older folks. I don't know if we get too many younger ones in the gaming thing. I've been away for quite a while.
Mhm.
So I don't really know, I know that there's, the small publishers, are out there producing games. So there are people playing the games, which is good. But I don't know what the broader community is up to, you know. But I can tell you some funny stories.
Sure.
At one of the early conventions, one of the ones that SPI was involved in, they had the Israeli General Adan for guest.
Oh,
So, after the convention, a couple of weeks after the convention, I'm sitting in the office, and this short guy walks in. Who's that? There was this journal. Hadn't met him. The check had bounced. I'm glad he came to collect, in the less formal way that the Israeli army does.
yeah.
Um, the game orgies, basically like 48 hours of game playing from Friday night till Sunday night. Um, you hear people sleeping in the corners and stuff. That was kind of fun. With Prados and Jim Cumbo, we had something called the Metropolitan Wargamers. It was probably the largest wargaming group in the New York area. We had over 100 members.
Huh.
We were able to do that because this would have been in the mid-70s. Because I was living for a couple of years in a high rise on the Upper West Side, and I could get use of the community room. Or maybe it was $100. I don't remember, but it was really, and we could have 100 people playing.
Yeah.
It was really good. Efforts to create there was a bunch of fellows, Tony Morale and a couple of other guys, ran I guess you would call it a wargaming clubhouse on I think it was corner of Broome Street and Broadway. Well, when that part of Manhattan was still, they hadn't invented Soho yet. It was sleazy. There was one of the sleaziest strip joints right in New York City, right across the street from it. Now it's luxury. They ran that for a while. You come in, you pay a fee, and they'd sell sandwiches and sodas and whatnot, and that went on for a year or two. Oh, paper airplanes, yeah. The building on 23rd Street we had the corner, so so here's 23rd Street and here's Park Avenue. No. Here's 23rd. Here's 23rd Street. Here's Park Avenue. We're right there. And we, the hex sheet. He'd make paper airplane on a hex sheet and fly them over the intersection, and they go soaring around. And I mean, we probably could have caused an accident, but we didn't. Then some of our teenagers were known to be indulging in mind-altering substances. And one day, one of the guys is sitting in the window, the window's open, sitting in the window, eating candy or something and talking, and suddenly he's not there. And everybody rushes to the window. He had climbed down on a ledge, and it was holding onto the little ledge. It was a great joke, I mean, I know how many stories up, but Oh, and then there were the informal games. There was Plot to Assassinate Dunnigan and the Destruction of SPI Center. They divided the office into areas, and in the stock room there was a tank, supposedly,
Yeah.
I've got the rules somewhere. I don't know where the map is, but I got the rules.
Yeah.
Little things that the folks were doing. Oh yeah, and in when designing some games, couldn't resist like designing Cruiser CA.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a Yamato counter, So somebody did an HMS Victory counter, and what was that? That the air game.
Flying Circus?
Yes, yeah. The counters in that were about an inch by an inch. That was the size of the planes, and somebody made a B-52 counter. It's a big piece of cardboard. Oh, they made some I think someone made a Gotha counter too, which was pretty big airplane, even.
Yeah.
Um,
What it does is it zooms in on you and it, blurs out your background. So if people have messy shelves, they don't have to.
yeah. Well, my shelves are increasingly empty.
Nice.
I just got had too many books.
Yeah. Well, you've been a military historian now for how long?
Well, my first published article, if you claim the Avalon Hill General, so whatever year that came out in, my first published article was in it, a year or so after that,
Yeah, well, it launched in 63, May of 63. So
yeah, and I mean, I literally, for various reasons, lost track of how much material I've written.
yes. Yeah.
I at one point attempted to start a file, and I don't know. There are millions of words out there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one way or another, I'm connected to about 40 books. There's a dozen or so games that I designed, and several hundred that I have a credit in.
Yes.
I didn't design, but did the research. So keeping track of that is just,
Well, anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to chat and share stories about SPI and thank you for your contributions to our hobby. It's so great to meet one of the originals.
The real way to make it work is get a bunch of us together, because then people start reminding each other of things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What happened when we did the 40th anniversary thing,
Yeah.
We couldn't stop talking.
Yeah, you should have recorded that. That would have been great.
It was just a spur of the moment thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a wonderful day and thanks again.
Okay, take care.
All right, take care.